So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paul Skinner, founder of MarketingKind, and welcome to this MarketingKind exchange in which we'll explore the purpose of a mayor with the Mayor of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, Andy Burnham. We'll be looking at the changing story of Manchester, how we can best cooperate in addressing our most pressing priorities, and also leaning into Andy's thinking and what it could mean for giving us all a more meaningful future to work towards right across the UK and beyond. Andy will be with us until 5:45, answering my questions and yours. And then we'll continue the conversation as a group, including with perspectives from our own Roy Sandbach and Beck Mortimer. So to make the most of our time, and because Andy is already very well known, I'll be brief in my introductory comments. Andy has been Mayor of the Greater Manchester City region for a little over 6 years and will be standing for re-election in 2024. He's given the city the mission of becoming a healthy, green and socially just city where everyone can thrive, and also set the ambitious target of achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2038, which is a full 12 years ahead of the national target. This is, of course, not Andy's first big job. Following a brief stint at Passenger Rail magazine, Andy was MP for Lee and held government positions including Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, before that Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, and in opposition served as Shadow Education Secretary, Shadow Health Secretary and Shadow Home Secretary. YouGov keeps a rolling tally of the UK's most popular politicians, and for some time now Andy has been coming in second place overall in the rankings, which may explain why media speculation over a potential return to Westminster and future prime ministerial potential is rarely too far from the surface. As someone who lives adjacent to the Manchester City region, I can confirm that Andy has even had beers and burgers named after him, and that the jacket that he wore for a speech standing up to the government when it sought to impose Tier 3 restrictions on Manchester during the pandemic without appropriate support has now found its way into the People's History Museum. So Andy, clearly you didn't have to be with us this afternoon. We're very grateful that you've chosen to join us for this conversation, and welcome to MarketingKind.
Thanks very much indeed, Paul. It's great to be with everybody. That's a hell of an introduction as well. Thank you. Very accurate. But you and I first met about a decade ago, didn't we, in Lee? I think. Am I right?
Yeah. You made the error of getting on the same train that I was on. And as a social entrepreneur who spends most of my time mobilizing voluntary activities, I couldn't help but introduce myself, and we had a very interesting set of conversations around connected care.
I think I remember now. And being in a room of other social entrepreneurs, what will I have signed up to by the time I finish this session tonight? Who knows, but we'll see, won't we? We'll see.
Well, hopefully there'll be enough material for the sequel to the book that you have coming out in the new year. But, you know, just to start with something light, at MarketingKind, we're really interested in the stories that really mobilize change. And so I'd like to know how substantive a change you have really sought to bring to the story of Manchester, and to what degree, speaking of voluntary mobilization, to what degree as mayor do you feel able to galvanize a whole city region into believing that it can be at the leading edge of change for a country?
Now, that is a very good question. But my answer is I haven't sought to change, if you like, the Manchester story. What I've sought to do is amplify it, because it is actually an inspiring story. If you go back 200 years in this city, people fought here for the right to vote, working class people, and obviously that led to some of them losing their lives on the streets of Manchester, Peterloo. But you know, this place has always been fighting for change. You go forward from that to the mid 1800s, 1862 to be precise, and the cotton workers of this city, when this place was known as Cottonopolis around the world, they took a decision that they would not handle slave picked cotton, which, when you think about it, is extraordinary, isn't it? Even though it put them out of work, they said Black Lives Matter 161 years ago. It explains why we have a statue of Abraham Lincoln in the city, because he sent them a statue to show his gratitude for their role in ending the American Civil War and then ending slavery, praising their sublime Christian heroism. I'm wondering whether I should get in the habit of sending a statue of myself to thank people for helpful interventions, but not yet. I've not reached that stage yet, Paul, but who knows that. So
after today.
But it's an idea, isn't it? That's a thing to conjure with. But then if you go further forward, the birthplace of the trade union movement, the home of the suffragettes. I mean, there are other things as well. Manchester has always been an entrepreneurial city, but it's kind of tried to pursue economic progress with social progress. And that is the story. And that's why I say I just try and amplify that, Paul. That's all I try and do. You know, we're still an entrepreneurial city. And you can see that in the amazing dynamic skyline of Manchester today, which is changing fast. But we're never a place that walks on by on the other side. And, you know, I think it's very much in tune with the values of your organization. No, I think that's very much what you're all about. You know, that you're kind of always fighting to improve people's lives, to build prosperity, but at the same time, you know, build a greater sense of fairness and inclusion. And that's really what Manchester has always been about. And so what I've tried to do in this role, and I'm the first mayor, is I can speak to that tradition really kind of powerfully, I hope, and I've tried to do that. So I'm not trying to change the story. I'm just trying to say this is Manchester's story. This kind of history that we've had is actually really relevant to the 21st century at a time when we are quite divided, we are quite unequal. I think the kind of values that run deep in the city might have something to say around making the country a bit better than it currently is.
Yeah, and I think we're going to lean into that quite a lot. Some of our members were maybe surprised, but they also excited to spot you at South by Southwest earlier in the year. And I guess part of achieving social justice through economic prosperity and the combination between the two is that part of your role has to be being a sort of chief marketing officer, if you will, for the region on a global stage. So how do you see the dimensions of the Manchester brand playing out today, and how do you use those dimensions to attract resources into the city region?
So I definitely would describe myself as chief marketing officer amongst the other responsibilities. And imagine what a moment that was for me, somebody who kind of grew up in this area, loved Manchester music of the 80s and 90s, saw New Order at what was called GMX in 1991, I think it was. Imagine to be the mayor of Greater Manchester introducing New Order to South by Southwest. I mean, you know, God, the stuff dreams are made of. So I think with marketing, things come through if you feel them, don't they? You know, if people are not just reading from a script. If somebody feels something, hopefully the marketing feels more authentic and real. And so in my case, it is, you know, to be that chief marketing officer for a place that kind of had a big role in building me into who I was. I just consider it just an enormous privilege. And I do, you know, I'll be honest with you. I go and do those things. Some people accuse me as, oh, you're out there at a music festival, you know, when you should be. But that is our power. That's our soft power as a city region, that cultural capital that we've got, you know, the sporting sort of capital. You know, I deploy it all because, you know, we are a place that's an exciting place to be for those reasons. You know, we have more students here than anywhere because they want to come here for those things. And that all builds the city region. But when you kind of ask me to sort of really then nail, well, what's the pitch? it doesn't end with New Order and United and City and all those other bands that everyone knows well. It goes back to that core thing of a place with a purpose. And I think that's the sell in the 21st century. I think, the talent that's coming through, the 20-somethings, the 30-somethings, I don't think they just want to work for organizations that are just about the bottom line and making money for other people. I think they want to work for organizations that, yes, want to be prosperous, but with a purpose as well. In a city that has a bigger purpose than just, kind of becoming a sort of a place where other people make money that doesn't have much of a soul. Well, Manchester definitely has a soul. It has a purpose. It has a heart. I think the work we do, not just on building business success, but around homelessness, matters to people. And I think it means you're more likely to attract that younger talent that wants to live in a place that's got that approach to life. So I think for all those reasons, Manchester is succeeding, I like to think, in the 21st century because, we kind of speak to a coming generation who want to see things done differently. That was the famous, for those who remember him, the previous chief marketing officer of Manchester, one or two before me, was a gentleman called Tony Wilson, who you might remember, who very famously said, this is Manchester, we do things differently here. Or, well, some people dispute whether he actually said it. But if you watch a film called 24-Hour Party People, it was in his script, and it's become now Manchester folklore that he did actually say that. So they're doing things differently. We all try and live it, though. We do try and live it, because I think, particularly, as I say, I'll get this wrong now, but Gen Z, aren't they? Gen Z want to live in a place where things are done differently, where it's not the old economic model, the mantra that the market is the only thing that matters. Well, it does matter, but there's more to life than that. And Manchester, I think, embodies that spirit, perhaps more than anywhere else in the UK.
Yeah, and it's so, on homelessness, by the way, just in case anyone on the call doesn't know, and this is obviously something you've taken very seriously, that you've led the way on, that wasn't intended to be part of your remit, I don't believe, when you became mayor, but that you've lent into and created a mayoral charity, donated significant parts of your own salary to addressing it, and so on. And of course, it is so important when you're attracting resources that the businesses changing Manchester's skyline are also actually helping the people who are already living there and not just extracting potential wealth from the region. But I wonder if we could explore the changing nature of cooperation and think about democracy for a moment. There is a line of thought that conventional democracy has become, too short-termist to really prevent an emergency like the climate emergency. It's become too slow to really respond to the kind of quick crises that we have. What happens if something gets out of control with AI? It's too small to really stand up to the most powerful global forces, but also too remote to actually foster local resilience and talent. Do you see ways as mayor of cooperating differently within a city region that can get us out of some of that predicament and help us sort of cooperate in a way that is equal to the challenges we face?
Well, it's an extremely astute question, and it's one I think a lot about. As the world's problems have got bigger over the decades, politics has got smaller and more superficial, and that's a real issue. It's a real problem. I often say, if I'm in a room of younger people, and I say this I say it half in jest, but as ever, when you say things half in jest, there is a kind of fundamental truth. I often say, look, my generation of politicians are the ones who've messed it all up for you, and you're the ones who are going to have to fix it. And I actually really believe that. I do actually have a great deal of faith in those 30-something, 20-somethings and younger who have grown up in quite a dysfunctional world and do see the need for better. And they've not been brought up to see difference, perhaps, in the way that people born in the 70s and 80s were like me, and I think they do look at the world through different eyes, through better eyes, often. Where I've got to with all of this, and I fell out of love with Westminster, and I can go into the reasons why. It was linked to Hillsborough, and I could talk about that if people are interested. But what I learned when I was there, and I kind of if I would say the one thing that brought me into politics in the first place was a desire for real change, big change. You know, it's not, I've never been a sort of go through the motions politician. I'm not there to be there. I'm definitely a politician who wants to do something when I'm there. You know, I came in to want to do something for the Northwest, you know, because I wanted a country that treated all parts, all nations and regions equally. You know, that's something that's pretty fundamental to me around the position of the North of England within the UK. But also when I was health secretary, I didn't want to I think you and I have probably talked about this when we first met, you know, that I couldn't defend a social care system that operates even then in the way that it did, certainly not now, with the decade of lack of reform. It's just not, it's not good enough. But I do ask myself, and I have to be challenging in my own party, it's not just a comment on the current leadership, but could the Labour Party of the last 20 years have created the NHS? I don't know. I have a doubt about that. You know, could any political party achieve something on that scale anymore? Because I challenged my own party when I was health secretary to create a national care service to provide social care on NHS terms. And I put that idea forward, and I looked around hoping others would, and it wasn't there. You know, it didn't feel like there was the wherewithal to do it. But you could look at other political parties on other issues. It feels like it's the trend to you know, over the years, the soundbite culture has taken more hold, and we've kind of gone more and more down something, the path of something called retail politics, you know, quite narrow. I mean, the 5 pledges being put forward by the current Prime Minister, I'm afraid, are a supreme example of what I would call retail politics. And it doesn't change. That's designed to win elections, not change the world. And there's a very big difference between those two things. And it's a problem. And just to finish, Paul, because I could speak all night about this, and I'll try not to. My take on it all, having done 16 years in Westminster, 6.5 years as Mayor of Greater Manchester, is we can moan all we like about the current crop of politicians, myself included, or the current political parties, my own included. But the question is, why are we all getting, you know, into this position where we're kind of despairing a bit at it? It's because the model doesn't work. It's deeper than the personalities or the parties. It's the model of politics. The Westminster system actually puts more power in the hands of the unelected than in the elected. It actually concentrates power in a very, very small number of hands, actually, through the way the first past the post system is, and the whip system in Parliament. It doesn't empower politicians to drive substantial change or to have the stature of people who can drive that change. And so for me, you know, my reflection is the country needs rewiring quite fundamentally to make power flow differently. Yeah. So I am a late but very passionate convert to proportional representation for the Commons. I think the unelected Lords need to be replaced with a Senate of the nations and regions. And then from there, I think as much power as possible needs to be devolved to the English regions and the nations. The great thing about the model that we're developing here is it's quite empowering because it's bottom-up change. You know, city region devolution gets power very close to people, and it allows more people to be truly involved in the use of that power. You mentioned homelessness. That's a network that we've built of people who are all pulling together in the same direction, you know, with a mission that we're all trying to achieve across the city region. That I found that kind of approach to life much more invigorating than anything really I was ever able to do in Westminster. So you've asked a really important question. I've had to give you a long answer because it's so profound, but I'm in the business now of calling for the fundamental rewiring of Britain to make power flow differently and to give agency to people in their places up and down this country, because I don't think this over-centralized Westminster system that we've all lived with all of our lives is ever actually going to deliver a kind of an equal country. It's, I'm afraid, always going to empower some places over the others, some people over others. That's just the nature of the way it is.
Yeah, there's so much to dig into there, which I'm really looking forward to.
You were after some small themes today, weren't you? But
No,
there we are.
I'm in go big or go home mode, and so I've got the perfect guest for that. But I want to push back for a second and give a counter view, which is you talked a bit about the history of Manchester. And of course, I'm with you on devolution and the future potential, and I want to unpick a lot more of that. But there is an argument that your leadership in Manchester is a bit of a false dawn. That you're a great guy, local guy, you've developed the national profile. Manchester has a bit of a history of cooperation, with the shared ownership of the airport across the region, a long history of cooperating in how to manage shared issues. There have been false dawns before. Manchester led the Industrial Revolution, but didn't necessarily lead the national economy for decades afterwards. It was at the forefront of social justice with the suffragettes, the cooperative movement, trade unions, as you say, but hasn't always received social justice. I think all of us more broadly were hoping that the internet and social media would usher in a new era of more participatory, inclusive politics. And actually, what's happened is we've been more torn apart from each other than ever before. So, is really what you're doing in Manchester a model that the country is likely to follow? Or could it be a bit of a false dawn that you've got the right guy in the right place with the right communities at the right time, but that it's something precious to hold on to rather than actually the direction that the country's likely to be going in?
That's a great question. I think in many ways you point to those big things that Manchester did in its history. So let's take the suffragettes. Just over 100 years ago, obviously secured the vote for women. In those 100 years, though, has getting that Westminster vote actually changed the lives of women up and down the country as much as they probably thought it would do? I don't think it has. And even the campaigners at Peterloo getting sort of working people the vote, has that changed their lot? Has that made this country more equal because they got the vote? And I would again say, I don't think it would have achieved what they thought it would do when they campaigned for it. And my point is back to that core narrative that the model of governance in this country, is not set up to deliver that equity across all people and all places. It's the nature of a system that does concentrate power in a very small number of hands in the centre, many of them unelected hands, and as I say, is not programmed to deliver equivalence of living standards across the UK. I use that phrase because that's in the German constitution. They have a they have a law, a basic law, that there should be equivalence of living standards across the German Länder, whereas we don't have anything like that. And it's no accident that we are quite a regionally unequal country. That's actually a product of our system, not a sort of an accident. So I guess that's what I would say in answer to your question, that the reason why I'm not hot-footing it back to Westminster is because I'm trying to do what Manchester have done in the past, which is challenge the status quo, build something new, and this time, rather than just requiring the power to put people in Westminster via votes to the Westminster system, actually what we're trying to do is say, no, if you take more power out of that system, Manchester can build something for itself, which is more meaningful than what we've had in the last 100 years or more. And I think we've got some tentative evidence to say that that's beginning to happen. I mean, if you were to say that this role was, I would like to have more power for sure, but it is going to bring some meaningful change. So as we sit here tonight, we are 2 weeks away from becoming the first city region in England to retake public control of our buses. Now, in the great scheme of things, you might say, well, that's a sort of, kind of sort of minorish issue. But it really isn't when you look at people's lives and how people move, and people on lower incomes generally do rely very much on buses and public transport. you know, by doing what we've done, we've fought to reverse that change of the Thatcher government in the mid-1980s. And we're now going back to what we would have wanted to keep all along, which is a public transport system that puts the public first rather than, let's say, private profit first, which is what we've had. Now, that's change. And actually, you could say, as we sit here in the kind of late summer of 2023, you know, when we look at the water industry or energy or rail, or, you know, in a microcosm with buses, I think you could argue that we need more public control of all of those other essential utilities if we're to give people everywhere in Britain slightly better lives. So I expect every other mayoral combined authority in time to follow what we've done on taking control of the buses, because I'm confident it's going to show that it's a much better way of running things than a deregulated system that we've all had for 4 decades. So I don't know, I hope that answers the question. I mean, what we're doing here is not just sort of posturing and, you know, positioning with New Order at South by Southwest. There are some real decisions being taken that are fundamentally questioning the economic direction that Britain has been in for the last 4 decades. And bear in mind, the direction that the government I was in continued. So it's not just a party political point here. It's actually a kind of consensus that have been there that the market does need to dominate everything. And really, it can dominate some things, but it can't be allowed to dominate everything, particularly not the things that are essential to people having a good life: housing, transport, water, energy, rail.
We, of course, met. What gave rise to the conversation is that the train we were on the Northwest line, the Virgin line at the time, was delayed. And of course, in a sense, it's appropriate for collective ownership, because it's not like we had the opportunity, if we wanted, to choose a different rail service that day instead. I mean, there was one rail service. So in a sense, I think, you know, there's a strong case to be made for what you're saying. I want to maybe take us in the opposite direction. So, you know, there is an argument that, you know, with crumbling schools, and I know that's affecting Manchester schools, it's affecting a Manchester theatre, the RAC, and in a sense, it feels as if you know, the crumbling schools has become already a bit emblematic of you know, the problem when something starts to crumble is that more and more crumbles away, and what are you left with? And there has been, I think, many people report a sort of hollowing out of certainly the public dimensions of national life. For an incoming government in 2024, without a huge amount of money to spend, and where there is necessary need for increased budgets, there'll certainly be a strong need to convince people that any money they're contributing is going to be useful and relevant to them. So in a sense, there's an argument that if you're looking for a big idea in that context, devolution could be exactly that idea. Absolutely. So, you know, if let's say, for sake of argument, both Rishi and Keir had no option to say no, what kind of, you know, we talked about green transitions, what would the devolution pathway look like, and what could it mean for national life?
Well, again, fantastic question. I think you are absolutely right to say, in an era of constrained resources, devolution becomes more and more compelling. And let me explain why. You know, I was Secretary of State for Health. And, you know, I looked from where I was in the Department for Health at the time, Richmond House, to the country. And I'm looking out through a very narrow silo of health services budgets and funding. Can I improve the nation's health from there? Well, in a very limited way, I could, but in a very significant way, no. Because health is either built or not built in homes, in workplaces, in communities. And the bizarre thing is, the Whitehall silo called the Department of Health can't and doesn't really influence those things. And actually, this is part of the problem with the model that I've been criticizing on this call. If you work really almost only through that model with sort of all the silos of Whitehall and quite enfeebled, impoverished local government, which I'm afraid is what we've got at the moment, and we've seen that in the news this week, you're not going to get policies that land on the ground that spend public money efficiently, because they're all doing their little silo thing, but none of it joins up and makes coherent place-based sense in a place like Greater Manchester. However, when we have control of those public budgets, we do join the dots around people. You know, we took a portion of the work programme through some DWP devolution, and we had a scheme called Working Well, which was looking at people longest out of the labour market due to health. We had double the success rate in getting people back to work. Why? Because we took a very personalised approach that very much prioritised mental health, local organisations, local volunteering. And it's not rocket science, is it? That worked better than the tick box computer says no regime operated often by DWP outlets. And so that, in an era of constrained resources, Paul, is actually the answer. To be fair to the current government, they gave us a new devolution deal in March, which I signed with Michael Gove, and he did a great job actually in challenging the Whitehall system to go further on devolution. And as part of that, we've been given the opportunity alongside the West Midlands to move to a single settlement akin to Scotland and Wales at the next spending review. So currently we have 150 different funding streams coming into the Greater Manchester Combined Authority from the Whitehall silos, and many of them have their own little conditionality on those streams. Equates roughly to £1.5 billion. So the possibility is that we will have a block of funding of £1.5 billion that we can start to use in a much more joined up way across, you know, to achieve what we believe are the priorities for our city region. And I think that is a big part of the answer. I am absolutely confident if public money, if the centre of government trusted regional and local government more, money would be better spent. In my view, the waste of funding comes from the here today, gone tomorrow schemes of Whitehall, the pet projects of ministers who are there, then they're moved and nothing comes of it. If you devolved funding in the way that I'm describing, I think you get the reform of services, you kind of join things up around people, you move more decisively towards prevention rather than just treating crisis and patching things up. So yeah, that's what I would say.
A lot of the measures that you're talking about involve giving more to people. And what I wonder is, and it may be hard for politicians to talk about this in some ways, but is there a counterpart to that comes in the form of expecting more from people as well? I mean, you mentioned, let's dive into that from a couple of dimensions, but you mentioned Hillsborough, and of course, you stood with the people of Liverpool in their long, protracted demand for some kind of justice. You've also stood with the people of Manchester during the pandemic, and also specifically with the Manchester Arena bombing. And in all of those contexts, you've been part of mobilizing a very serious and meaningful level of togetherness and standing together in the face of serious problems. You know, do you see ways that we can stand better together on some of the, you know, even bigger emergencies like the climate emergency, like the need for social justice and more equal living standards? You know, is there a way to harness that togetherness for some of the bigger picture, you know, at a time when, you know, a lot of politicians are, you know, using initiatives relating to the climate, for example, as more of a wedge issue that is separating people and dividing people, and that, you know, maybe one side is doing that worse than another, but that, you know, politicians are all across the spectrum are a little bit stepping back as a result?
I think so. I think it starts with truly listening, doesn't it? And hearing what people are saying. I keep, you know, to not to over make the point I made earlier. How could an entire English city have cried injustice for 20 years and no one in the Whitehall and Westminster system was listening? And that's a question that I posed in the Commons when we finally got the truth about Hillsborough, but I've never had an answer. And I think it is because we have a system that likes to play divide and rule, actually, across the UK. That's how it sustains its power at the centre. When it suits, it will play public opinion against the people of Scotland or Northern Ireland or Liverpool, or that's a feature, I'm afraid, of our national political and public life. And often it's done with the support of newspapers who have a similar agenda that's bound up in doing that. I have a great fear that what you're saying might come through, that net zero will become the new culture war, where it already is to a degree. And where does that go? You know, if we're constantly fighting these culture wars, where does that actually get you as a society? It might get some people elected, or they think it will, but the damage it does in the long run is huge. And I feel that we've lost, you know, you were talking about, you know, modern politicians before, the kind of current generation. We've lost people from politics who were bigger figures, I think. You know, as I say, maybe my generation was the professional politician, so they were kind of schooled in sound bites and tactics, but not actually big, what is it to be a politician? What are you there to do? And I kind of, maybe, if I'm honest, you know, well, was more in the sort of the kind of former school when I first came in, but I kind of learned that in the end wasn't me. I was there to make change, as I said, but that art of making change has kind of gone, really. And I don't see, you know, big figures reaching out, because if you're going to make change in Parliament, you have to work with the other side to some degree or other. And that's what happened on Hillsborough. Theresa May, you know, in the end, the Shadow Home Secretary made a connection with Theresa over that issue and other issues, and we did something together with others. But you know, we formed that alliance. But it's kind of the exception rather than the norm, isn't it, these days? And I think that's a real worry. You know, the politicians, you know, the one nation tradition in the Conservative Party are kind of more old Labour, which was frowned upon in the past, school of people who were kind of, you know, people who'd kind of made change happen through the trade union movement and then came into Parliament. I don't know, there's something lost somewhere along the way that needs to be brought back. Because those politicians, when I was in Westminster, would never have made statements of the kind that I've heard recently. F off back to France. I mean, seriously, this is a coarsening of the discourse to a level that I never ever thought I would see. And actually, if he were still in Parliament, Kenneth Clarke would have taken apart anybody who used that type of invective in Parliament. He would have not held back. But it feels to me that the sort of brakes are off a little bit, and people are just going full throttle at these sort of culture wars. And I worry massively about where it leaves us. And if net zero becomes the latest one, okay, well, you know, Brexit was one, now it's net zero, and, you know, let's turn half the country against net zero. That's a bad thing. Just quickly to answer, well, what do we do about it? Go back to kind of what people are actually saying. People who are worried about net zero, what is it that they're saying? And this is this unifying point you were trying to get me to address. I think what they're saying is, don't whack us to net zero. Don't hit us with a big stick and taxes towards net zero. And I think, you know, to the extent that, you know, the ULEZ debate is played out as I've heard it, I think there is something there that needs to be heard. You know, I think give people in life, it's always better to give people incentives to go in the direction that you think is the right way. Help people to net zero and actually give them better public transport or better homes or better jobs and things that they can believe in. You know, that's I think the way you get people back towards more unity and common cause. I think this kind of tendency where both sides of politics will sort of double down and play into their position, that does actually worry me.
Yeah, we're not particularly party political at MarketingKind, but I'm happy to admit that the Rwanda policy was the first time I've ever been ashamed to be British. I really can't stand that policy, and I'd love to explore with you if there is anything that could be done in Manchester to test out ways to give asylum seekers the opportunity to be economic contributors while they're still being processed, because they don't want to be stuck in a hotel doing nothing and sucking up public money.
No, I think that idea is absolutely of the moment, I think, yeah.
Well, if there's a way to develop that as a pilot in Manchester, I'll work on it for free. But
Paul, in the time we've got, does anybody have a question? Yeah. I'm quite happy to pick up. I don't want to just...
People could raise their digital hands.
I've got my agenda, which I could talk about all night, but if I want to, more than happy to.
Looks like Roy is already ready with a question.
Hi, Andy.
Hi, Roy.
Hi. Music to my ears. I'm sitting in Sunderland right now, and there's a sort of movement for change in some of our bigger northern cities, which is encouraging, and it is bottom up.
Yeah,
I think we've got the people with us.
Yeah,
so long as there's a vision. Anyway, my question, however, is devolution's great, and I'm with you on it. But what does that leave central government to do? What is their role then?
I think I can. Thanks, Roy, and I agree with you about that movement, that groundswell. Myself and the mayor of the Liverpool City region are writing a book actually called Head North. Which is what we did. We decided to leave Westminster together, and we're going to put that vision out there about what rewiring Britain looks like. What are the 10 things that could rewire Britain and empower the North? So watch this space. Shouldn't be on here to flog a book, Paul, should I? It should be more meaningful social change than that. But look out for it. But to answer your question, Roy, I think I can answer it quite convincingly, rather than saying, oh, it's this, this, and this, but tax and defence has to stay in Westminster. Well, obviously, tax and defence do have to stay in Westminster, and national security, and all. You know, we could have a list of things that you would always keep there. But the best answer I could give to your question is the difference between the what and the how. Is the what stays in Westminster? You know, what is central government requiring for all residents, citizens of our country when it comes to NHS standards, or what young people need from their education in terms of the curriculum, or, you know, the qualifications that they take. The Westminster can say, this is what we want, a Westminster government, but then they should say, but how you do it in Greater Manchester, or how you do it in Liverpool, or how you do it in Sunderland is up to you there. As long as you're working to that objective, we'll devolve the sort of, you know, the kind of way you do it. That's, I think, the balance that you want to, you know, want to get towards.
Great. There's a big dialogue to be had then between the two, obviously. I'm thinking particularly about innovation clusters and big business developments in city regions where skills will be required, which are different in each region.
Well, that's a good point, because I'm in a bit of an argument with, I'm happy to stay a little bit longer, Paul, if it helps you. I mean, brilliant. There's a big argument brewing really over that trailblazer devolution agreement that I was talking about before, because we said to Michael Gove, we want more power over technical education.
Right.
The university route is a national route because it's UCAS, it's, you know, there's a national system, there's a sort of English baccalaureate to guide the kids that way. But we said, but what about the kids not on the university route?
Yeah.
So I said, to balance the English baccalaureate, or the EBAC as it's called, we want an MBAC, a Greater Manchester baccalaureate, where the employers in our city region can say what GCSEs they value, as opposed to which ones the DFE value. And they would say to me, the creative subjects for sure, and they're currently excluded from the English baccalaureate, engineering, business studies, computer science is in, but they would say that should be compulsory. Every kid should be doing it now. And so we've put this forward, the MBAC, Greater Manchester Baccalaureate, and the Education Secretary, amongst other public statements that she's made recently, said, oh, no, we don't want something different in Manchester as they've got in Liverpool. But yeah, I'm sorry, Mrs. Keegan, but yes, we do, because the reason why this country has never fixed technical education and always had it as the sort of second-class route for kids from working class communities is because we haven't devolved control over it, because the labour market needs of Manchester, Greater Manchester today, are very different from Liverpool or from the Northeast. You know, some commonality, but there's difference. And if you don't allow the kind of employers here to guide the system to get what they need for their vacancies, then we'll never fix it. So by definition, that is an issue that has to be devolved. Technical education we will never fix it as a country until we devolve it. And Germany is absolutely the proof of that one.
Yeah. Great example. Thanks, Andy. And I'll let others come in.
Yeah, so Andy, I'll let you say when is the last question and you have to go because you've been very generous already.
No problem. I can see 3 hands, Paul. So shall I take those?
Wonderful.
3? Got Beck, Diana and Gary.
Hi, Andy. Thanks so much for this. I've been frantically scribbling as you've been talking. So just in terms of when you were talking about the challenges of politics and Westminster and political discourse more generally, you know, in terms of art of making change, you talked about how it's probably not our generation that's going to do that, it's the next, you know, really looking at your 20s and 30s. Talked about the culture wars and Brexit and net zero, the soundbite trends, the silos. There's a lot about the old model that's really quite depressing when we look at it like that. It feels quite hopeless. And I just want to go back to Paul's very first question to you, actually, which I enjoyed the way you answered, but I felt like you talked about Manchester. So Paul's first question was really digging into MarketingKind is very much about stories and narration and recognizing the stories we tell ourselves and each other are how we shape our world. It's how we perceive our world and our culture. And it feels as though you've got this huge history to Manchester and these great values which you can build upon. But I didn't get a vision from you. I got a sense of, you know, this is exciting, this is where we can build. And I think to really land the idea of a new model, it's about figuring out, you know, understanding people and where you can help them. But it's more than just kind of amplifying a story. It's setting out the stall for a story of hope and where we can get to. And I feel that that's the piece that's missing. And again, I got excited when you started talking about devolution. Potentially constrained resources could actually be beneficial with devolution. And I think, again, the broader narrative at the moment is because we don't have the resources, what can we do differently? So again, how do we lean into that as a story of hope, I think is what I'd like to understand.
Yeah, no, it's a fair challenge, Beck. And I probably should have said more about it, but I think I can just answer the vision thing, because we're saying go with net zero as a, you know, we've got this 2038 target that Paul mentioned, and it's a very serious science-based target. But what we say is that's not a kind of achieving net zero and ending up with an even less equal society than one we've already got. That is, you know, use that as the catalyst and actually talk more about the effects on people rather than the planet first. You know, you go on that journey and you get cleaner, much more affordable public transport that's integrated and, you know, supports people to access jobs and opportunity. You get homes that are cheaper to rent and cheaper to run because of the way in which you've changed and improved people's homes, because there's no point just decarbonising homes without fixing the roof and everything else to make them, you know, better places to live, to improve people's health. You reindustrialise the north of England in a good way. If you're going to go faster to net zero than the rest of the UK, well, that will capture an economic dividend and then jobs that will always be here that are going to be good jobs. So our argument is and this answers the point Paul was saying before, the 2038 journey is a journey to a more equal Greater Manchester, where people have better lives, better health. And you know, I don't know if that's enough of a vision, but that is our journey. You know, we've got to be realistic as well. That's what we, you know, we were the ones who coined the phrase greener, fairer. That was absolutely where we've been for a while, actually.
And could I just add to that in terms of the vision, looking at devolution more broadly across the 10 different areas that have now devolution at the moment in England? Is there a way to consider how you share insights and learnings and have greater impact outside of Greater Manchester too? Definitely.
And we're conscious of the fact that if we all go in very divergent directions, that's not going to necessarily build the coherence of devolution. So I'll give you a really clear example. We introduced something called the Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter, which in a, you know, you will kind of seen these type of things before, but sets out what good work looks like from our point of view. Steve Rotherham in Liverpool said he wanted to do one. I said, well, just take ours, you know, because then we won't have a company in Liverpool say, oh, you know, company who works in both Liverpool and Manchester say, well, they're doing this there and that the other. And then Tracy Braven in West Yorkshire has taken the same template, you know, with a few tweaks for local circumstances. So we're conscious as a group of mayors that we need to build a coherence in what we do. I'm putting the buses under public control, but Steve and Tracy are likely to do the same very soon. So there'll be a kind of coherent public transport system across that M62 corridor. So, you know, we're very, very conscious that we need to actually the M10 group of mayors, and I include Andy Street in this. I would include Andy, but not necessarily all the other mayors on the other side, but I will include Andy. We work very much in a collaborative way rather than in a competitive way. We will compete sometimes when we're forced to, for the Eurovision, or I don't know, Channel 4, when they were making us bid for Channel 4. I said to Steve Rotherham when he got Eurovision, I said, look, I'm really happy that you've got it. We both get visitors from it, but we get to keep our reputation as the home of cool music, and that's fine by me. You go ahead and do Eurovision. So we can all kind of benefit from these things. So no, the point I'm making is we are quite collaborative as a group, to be honest. When it comes to the investment zones that Roy mentioned, we're saying, I'm saying to sort of my lot, well, we've got a life sciences ambition. Well, so Cambridge and the Golden Trial do that really well. So shouldn't we sort of say, can we partner with you and sort of, if you can't accommodate something, can we work with you on that? Or, advanced manufacturing, can we partner with the West Midlands on that? So we don't do our own zones on our own and then try and win everything. You know what I mean? We just have a sensible collaborative approach to these things and these clusters as we develop them across the country. Diana? Don't mute that. It's a flashback to the pandemic, that, isn't it?
Well, funny you should mention that, because I was just going to talk about that. We all remember standing out on our doorsteps and banging on our pans for the NHS and clapping for them too. But one thing you just touched on, and inspired by what you talked about in terms of National Care Service, was health and wellness. I think we need to link that with net zero. I think that's a missing link. It makes such sense when we also connect that, as you did touch on earlier, with the housing standards and also with fuel poverty. If we're not able to look after the poorest in our communities, how can we possibly stand up tall and feel proud about where we live? And if we all pull together, perhaps within a devolutionary model, this could be the way forward, because then there's some community spirit, which perhaps is lacking at the moment, and something we all need to build on. Interestingly enough, you mentioned Theresa May. We all have our views about perhaps what she did and didn't do, but what was interesting was, she did make it a legal mandate, which at that stage wasn't around really, and so it's driven that focus. So for me, what's interesting is perhaps, if she has a legacy, that might be it. The fact that we can build on that and drive things forward in ways which, will be doing something big, doing things differently, and where we can all feel really proud, especially as, prices are probably likely to go up again in the winter.
Yeah. Well, you put it very well, Diana. And I think devolution is the thing to hold on to here, because in quite divided times politically, devolution would appear to be the one thing that all of the main parties are saying they support. And the reason why it's a really good thing is because it builds agency in people and places, and it counters that feeling of alienation and neglect, or the powerlessness sometimes people feel. I think that was bound up in the Brexit vote. I don't think it was all about Europe. I think it was a kind of cry for kind of attention and support from certain places, as well as maybe an expression of views about the European Union. So I think devolution is definitely the common ground. And the thing about it is maybe something I've not touched on, but if I could touch on it quickly, Paul, the difference between what I do here and what I used to do in Westminster. Westminster forces you to take a party first approach, the whip system and all of that. Point scoring comes first, and knockabout and all of that. In this role, if you're to do it properly, you've got to take a place first approach. You've got to say, look, irrespective of who I am as a mayor in terms of my political affiliation, it's the place that matters first. I will put the place first. I will respect the fact that people who voted for a range of political parties at a general election will have voted for me at the 2 mayoral elections I've stood at. The point being, when you start from a place first perspective, that's a unifying force, because people, whoever they vote for, can say, right, well, I actually believe in the place Greater Manchester. So if we start there, common ground will come from that starting point. Mm. And that's why devolution, I think, offers something, that place first perspective kind of creates a better place for people to come together and start to sort of forge ways of working and ways of doing things. And that's a big reason why it's so valuable and why we need to sort of build it up. But yeah, I agree with everything that you said, to be honest.
But also it gives us a chance to perhaps try things differently in regional ways and be centres of excellence in driving that change. Especially when we're looking at things like crumbling concrete and things like Grenfell, you know, clearly there are huge issues around housing standards, which perhaps as you're building so much in Manchester, you could champion.
Well, we're not bad at building. We're getting on with it, man. But see, the thing that it does come back to is trust, though. You know, there's been this thing. I tweeted about this yesterday, and I got half of the right-wing trolls in the country on my case who wanted to say that Birmingham Council, the reason they've gone bust is because of rainbow road crossings and God knows, you know, whatever they wanted to make political points out of it. I made a non-partisan point that national government, under all colours of government, has disrespected local government. It's not funded it properly. It's kind of, you know, now they have to bid to a levelling up fund to build some public toilets. But where's the days gone where local councils had the wherewithal to just improve their places? And that's a problem, you know, that distrust of local areas. If you'd have devolved schools' capital budgets 10 years ago, they'd have gotten and done a lot more with that money, the local authorities, than this kind of constant bidding round that Westminster tries to do. And I think, you know, the learning is on Westminster's side, in my view, as somebody who's come out to local government. The learning has to be done there, not here. There's a bit of learning here, but it's mainly got to be done there. Sorry, Gary, I'll go to you, and then I'll leave you after this one, Paul.
Well, hopefully I won't consume too much of your time, because so I'm the CTO of a software company based in Stoke. So I'm just down the road from Manchester. But in a previous role, I was working on air quality monitoring, and we deployed air quality monitors in Manchester city, thanks to Transport for Greater Manchester. And the thing that strikes me about the region and strikes me about your role, and indeed, I guess this is a challenge for everyone else on this call as well, from a storytelling perspective, is the immense convening power that you have with your colleagues to bring multiple communities, whether it's education, whether it's in-work training, whether it's the venture capital, whether it's the research council, the universities, to bring those people together. And I guess wrapping around that, and this is the job of marketing and storytelling. If we can create a really bold story for what the North is going to do, and exploit the power you have as a convener of all these interest groups, you could do something absolutely enormous. And it can tie into public health, but also it can tie into cold hard cash. You know, there's you know, going green isn't just about improving health, which is an essential component. It is also going to be a massive multi-trillion-dollar industry globally in the next 30 years. And the North is the home of an awful lot of industrial revolutions that have taken place over the last 200 years. Why not the green industrial revolution as well?
100%, Gary. I mean, on your first point, that is so true. The superpower of any mayor is the convening power. That is your superpower. And so, you know, people obsess with me. Well, do you have power over this? And, you know, have you got enough power? Actually, do you really need it? When you can get everybody around the table in that room and say, look, is everybody up for doing this? And the best example I can give you is homelessness that Paul mentioned before. When I was elected, I did in the end say we need to end rough sleeping. You know, we need to create a situation where we're just not accepting that people have to sleep rough on our streets. And I did get the health service to contribute, and probation contributed to a fund. And then I kind of said to the voluntary sector, we need everyone to sort of work with us to deliver a bed every night, because that's our scheme. It was interesting to me in my first sort of days as mayor, it was clear that commissioning practice that Westminster forces on local government has created this sort of competitive thing amongst, you know, the way people have to bid for funds is, well, we're the best organization in the world because we do this and they're rubbish because, you know, do you know what I mean? It creates that spirit. When I kept saying to people, look, we've got to leave egos at the door. Tackling homelessness is bigger than any of us, and every organization in the room's got a role to play. And it's that thing about pulling everybody together, getting everybody facing in the same direction, and then pulling in the same direction. That is what makes change happen. Public sector, private sector, voluntary sector, faith sector. That is where change can happen. And actually, that is, the great power of these mayoral roles. And if you then apply it to a much bigger sort of, if you like, canvas, you're right. It absolutely could be the case that you do the same on a bigger stage for where the Northwest could be in the future, and you get everybody aligned around the same goal. And the 2038 thing is that's what that's meant to be. Steve Rotherham and I have jointly commissioned some work that says the Northwest of England has the natural assets to generate not just enough renewable energy for our own needs so that we become independent and self-sufficient, but actually double what we need. So we can become a net exporter of green energy to the UK and the world if we now line up together and really go at that plan. A tidal barrier on the Mersey, which Steve wants to do, onshore wind, which has positively moved forward this week, which is good. And, if you go at a vision like that, then I think you actually do re-industrialize the north of England in a really good way. And the kind of history turns full circle there, doesn't it? The industrialization that caused so much harm and damage and health impact comes back the other way in the 21st century. And that is a story, to pick up Beck's point, that is a story I think people can get behind. And people on the right of politics and on the left will say, re-industrialize the north sounds a good thing. Yeah, okay, I'm up for that. So I'm not saying I've got all the stories tonight and all the finished sort of visions, but I hope there's enough there that you can say, okay, there's enough in this to kind of take a country that feels like it's gone backwards in recent times and is a bit struggling to get a handle on the future. Maybe some of what I've said tonight points a way to doing things a little differently in true Manchester style. But I'll leave it there, Paul, because you've got some further deliberations to do.
We'll try to mark your homework a little bit for the next.
Do that.
I would say, in a nutshell, though, I've tried to stress test what you've been doing in my prep for today, and I found that the more I did that, the more I came to admire the mission that you're leading. Devolution, of course, isn't finished yet. So when we've all read Head North and you've secured your third term, will you consider having a further conversation with us?
Certainly will.
In 2024. Well,
you'll all have to buy the book first, of course, because
of course. I imagine, will there be an audio version as well?
Yes, we're going to do that.
So multiple versions to choose from. So thank you so much.
No worries.
For your generosity.
Okay, everybody. Thanks for listening.
And
thanks for your time tonight. Great conversation. Thank you.